Hi everybody. All right, I have one more thing I want to talk about today, which is a little bit about Project Zero, just some thoughts on hard projects, academic dishonesty, and that whole nexus of basically pushing you to be as capable as possible while not overburdening you. So I have a question which I'll ask in real life, which is how far are you on Project Zero so far? That'll be a very biased sample because it's the people that are there at Zoom and there in live, but so it goes. So I want to talk about Project Zero just for a moment. So it's a new project this semester, and there's a lot of ideas in it, right? We got all these things I enumerate here. I'm not going to say them out loud, but one I will highlight is problem decomposition. It's extremely important. In fact, arguably the essence of the entire discipline of computer science is about problem decomposition. So for example, for the pattern-aware guessers, rather than writing a chunk of code that very carefully manipulates the list of words with a bunch of nested for and if statements or something, I tend to think that it's better to try and break your task into separate pieces. So for example, take the list of words and create a new list of words that is all the words that match the pattern. Once you have a list of all words that match the pattern, create a frequency map, get a frequency map, get the next guess. Okay? I think that's a really important skill. There's another thing which is about picking the right data structures, and that's kind of in between the lines, but there's a couple of non-trivial uses of a map. The frequency count structure, which you also saw in 0B. Then they'll have the word set size counting, which I think is one of the most interesting parts of the project. And honestly, I feel like the guessers might have been a little overkill because what I really, really like is the heart of the evil chooser. Anyway, that's Project Zero. So Project Zero is totally new, and so we're carefully watching to make sure that things are going okay. Some evidence that it's going okay versus not okay. So we get 350 full score submissions so far, which is okay, but not amazing. I'd like to see more by now, ideally. And we have some ed posts by some students who are very stuck at spending lots of time. Like one person said they've spent 12 hours a day for several days. That's concerning. Just a little, like, some number of students, we're all over the place, and I'll talk a little bit more about speed in a bit. We're all over the place in terms of where we are as programmers in this course, but getting posts like that does make one worried. And then office hours, the biggest concern to me was the office hours was a little overloaded yesterday. So that's a little more concerning, but we do have 20 new paid staff who are joining shortly. I'll keep an eye on how things are going and see if anything needs adjustment. But on that note, I kind of want to just talk about the idea of plagiarism and problem difficulty and why the way I just think about the whole process of giving hard projects and trying to get students to stick to them. So I want to note that plagiarism is very common in introductory programming courses. If you Google, you will find numerous news stories in like the Stanford Daily or the Harvard Crimson or the Daily Cal that are like, hey, huge cheating scandal in programming class, right? And so why does this happen so much? Well, one is it's a new environment for students, right? In these introductory programming classes, people tend to be freshmen, maybe sophomores, straight out of community college as a junior transfer. So you don't have these firmly established norms of what's okay. You're always kind of like looking to your peers to see what's up. And so, you may not have a firmly established norm and you find yourself stuck. And the reason you find yourself stuck a lot is that we have different levels of preparation. So I did some work a couple years ago with 61B where we found that if you're at the 25th percentile mark in terms of, let's say, exam scores, I think that's how we ranked it, people who are around the 25th percentile in terms of, we'll call that preparation, they take about twice as long to do assignments as people in the 75th percentile, in the top quarter. And that's a lot of time, right? So if we target an assignment, expecting it takes 8 hours for the median student, then if you're somebody who's in like the least 10% prepared, it's just going to be a really, really big grind because of the spectrum of where people are. And lastly, one of the reasons that plagiarism happens is that it feels like a mostly victimless process, right? So if you're just stuck, like why does it really matter that you're copying code? And in fact, I'll say that some instructors, some professors don't really necessarily spend a lot of time talking about this because their sense is, well, if you're depriving yourself of the learning experience, then sure you get the points in the projects, but so does everybody else. And then you're just going to get demolished by the exams. But I try to make this a little more of a first-class concern because it's an introductory class, because you're still setting the norms for how you're going to move forward academically or professionally in your real life. And, to the degree that I can nudge you in some good way as some random guy in a room somewhere who's your instructor, I'd like to do that. So why does plagiarism matter? Why am I digging into this? Well, there's a couple reasons. One of them is sort of like a societal good ethics perspective, right? I mean, you might seem silly that I'm even questioning why it matters, but if we think about it, right? Like, why do I really care? One of them is a philosophy I have about ethics, that it's basically habits. And what I mean by that is you almost, like, you're ethical or moral or you're good for the world out of habit, right? That, yeah, sure, there's some distinction between people's moral compass that's built in when they're born or whatever, I think. But really, the way that you conduct yourself in your affairs day to day, I mean, it ultimately adds up to good or bad behavior, right? So if you fall into the habit of plagiarism, then I think you're sliding in this direction of being someone who lives off of being parasitic on others, right? You know, the Bernie Madoffs or George Santoses or Elizabeth Holmeses of the world. And I think that kind of corruption is a really subtle but insidious evil that causes huge amounts of misery. So, you know, let's not do that. That seems like a bummer. Yeah, so there's moral habits that are good to build. Like, we should try to be upstanding insofar as we can. And another one actually is just practical. If I can't appeal to you from a sense of, like, let's be good people, I'll say, as Brian Harvey, one of the former instructors of 61A put it, very, you know, distinguished professor back in the day before he retired about a decade ago. He says, you don't want to get a job that you don't like and can't do, which is, you know, where you're headed, basically, if you're plagiarizing heavily on assignments. Okay. So just to talk just a tiny bit more about this, about why the projects are hard and how plagiarism is thought of by me and course staff. Back in the summer of 2014, I posted, when I was about to teach 61B the first time, tell me what you think. You know, I don't know anything. I've never taught a class at Berkeley, or at least not a CS class. People said, we want to keep the really hard projects, which I've mostly done. Toned them down a little, but yeah, maybe Project Zero is a little too big. It's new. But mostly I've tried to keep the big projects that are much bigger than the kind of things we were doing in the equivalent class at Princeton. The other one that was big was, please remind us not to cheat and that you actually look out for cheating. That's the short version of the blue quote. So we have these set of rules about what is the actual line where we're going to pursue cheating cases. The code you do should be yours. You shouldn't have anybody else's actual solution, whether that's from GitHub or a friend. And you should also cite your sources. Many more words here, straight out of the syllabus. I'm not going to read them here. But maybe I want to not just sound like the plagiarism police and talk about alternate suggestions. What to do if you're really stuck. So if you feel like you're stuck or just moving super slowly, the office hours queues are huge, you are stressing, which happens to a lot of people. Here's some alternatives. One, let us know if you need an especially long extension. If you have personal life issues, that's fine. Like, we understand, we'll do what we can. And, you know, it's a give and take. It's always a process of talking through it. It's messy, but we're happy to work with you. We'd much rather you take time than to plagiarize. Second, if you're unable to, you know, so office hours, the interactions you have are relatively light, but ideally, if you have a group that you can work with, then it's someone you can talk to continuously throughout the semester. So we're currently working on a matching system. There'll be more information on that soon. And then lastly, perhaps somewhat controversially, if you're somebody who came in, you know, just barely having squeaked through 61A or 88, you know, you had a B-, C+, C lower, and you just aren't there yet, maybe, and you still have time at Berkeley, and you really want to do 61B, I think you could do it. Like, I have a strong sense that basically any Berkeley student can do very, very well in this class. And so I think that, yeah, if you need to take a semester before you come back, that's fine. And if you're wondering, how do I prepare so that I do better next time? I think working through the content from the first few weeks in advance or first month or whatever is a great way to do it. In an ideal world, I would have, you know, 61B in a version where you could span 2 semesters. That would be great. I do have a list, if you do end up working with a group of people, of ways that you can try to collaborate, or the bounds of acceptable collaboration. So it's okay to look at someone else's code to help them, to help someone debug, but please don't touch their computer if possible. You can technically look at someone's solution as long as you don't have a copy, but I'm going to call that very dangerous because you'll end up gravitating towards their solution. And then really, really dangerous is if you actually sit down and basically treat a solo project as a group project where your code's all very similar. Okay. Now, if I could, I'd actually say please don't look at anybody's solutions at all, but I really want you to take the rules seriously, unlike, say, speed limits, as I note here. Okay. But the basic effect is it should be as if you never saw someone else's code at all. Okay, so wrapping this up. So we do actually harshly deal with plagiarism. And by that, I mean, we sit down with you at a meeting. You end up having to write some self-reflection. You have to redo an assignment. It's like a big deal. We send your case to the Office of Student Conduct. And the reason we do this is that although probably the worst part of this job is dealing with plagiarism. But I think that enforcing the rules is ultimately productive. We could talk more about that later if you want some time. And the other thing is, like, we have software that's very good. So every semester we send like 50 to 100 cases to the Office of Student Conduct, so don't do it. But I think really the more fundamental message is that if you are feeling lost or you are feeling like you're not making the progress you want, find some kind of alternate strategies. Reach out to us. We'll do our best to help you as much as we can, and we ask that you do your best too. All right, that's it. So yeah, have a good weekend. See ya.